Very much. Kamal Dervis.
Thank you. Let me try to make a few points. And one, perhaps, as an economist, to go to the economic side of things, we heard, I think, a masterful summary by Jean-David Levitt of what happened. But when you look at the European economic situation and compare it to some of the problems in the world, I don't want to let the opportunity pass to underline that what already Keynes, after the Second World War, when he was trying to build the international monetary system, had emphasized, is that for every deficit there in the balance of payments, there is a surplus. And the adjustment in Europe, and there is deep need for adjustment, and it has many dimensions. But I don't believe that there can be a successful end of the story without the surplus countries in the north, particularly Germany, but not only Germany, accepting that they have to also make an effort so that their surpluses don't continue at very high levels. Because at the end of the day, as I said, every surplus, has a deficit on the other side of the mirror. And in that sense, it's kind of interesting to compare the discussion on Chinese surplus. I have the Vice Minister next to me. And I think China has acknowledged that while the Chinese growth is very important and needs to continue, Chinese competitiveness is good for the world economy, but that a too large Chinese surplus is a problem, and that China itself gradually wants to reduce that surplus vis-a-vis, in terms of the overall world economy. So there is some similarity between what we're seeing inside Europe with these huge balance of payment surpluses of the Netherlands and of Germany, and what we're seeing in the G20 world and the wider world. And I think it's worth thinking about these similarities, and when we think about the lessons of Europe as well as the lessons from the rest of the world for Europe. I very much hope the plans will be successful, but I don't believe that while the southern countries, the Mediterranean countries, in this case Greece, Portugal, Italy, and Spain, have, of course, major adjustments to make, I think it would be quite one-sided, and from an economic point of view, wrong to say that they're the only ones that have to adjust. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point, it came up in the discussion, and again, it has a global counterpart, is this issue of people, citizens versus governments. And clearly in Europe, but not just in Europe, even at the United Nations, even in other international constructs, there's always this kind of, there are two dimensions. There are the citizens, the people of Europe, and then there are the governments of Europe. And it is true that the governments are democratically elected and they do represent the people, but nonetheless, purely intergovernmental processes tend to, over time, lose the emotion, the kind of enthusiasm that comes from people's politics. Now, I don't think that Europe can move, or indeed the world can move, to a world of citizens only, or of individuals, of people, away from the world of governments and of nation states. I think both will stay. But in the equilibrium, in the balance, particularly in Europe now, I do believe that a significant increase of the space for pan-European politics has to enable the integration process that Jean-David Levitt and others have told us about. I don't think that this integration process, and President Ilves also mentioned that the kind of deeper, stronger integration in Europe, can work unless there is a strengthening of what I would call pan-European democracy. And that goes, I think, to some degree, having the European Parliament more enabled, having more direct, perhaps a direct election of either the head of the Council or the President of the Commission by European citizens. I think things of this sort are in the end going to be needed if the more integrated fiscal policy and economic policies of the Eurozone are really going to work. Otherwise, I think the gap between the technocrats and the economists and the summits and the councils and the everyday life of the citizens will be too large and will be the main obstacle for the success of Europe, I believe. I mean, I live in the US now. It's quite clear that how shall I put it, the allegiance to the federal structure of the United States by American citizens is very strong, even though some of them are recent immigrants. And the allegiance to Europe that European citizens have to feel for it to work, even if it will not be like the US for a long time, but to be able to integrate more, I think this political allegiance and enthusiasm to Europe, rather than just the individual states of Europe, has to increase. And I want to give one example of the importance, although I'm an economist and a technician in a way, but of feelings and of values, using the opportunity to be on the same panel with His Saintliness, the Patriarch of Istanbul, of Constantinople, as he said, an inhabitant of Istanbul and a Turkish citizen. And maybe we're a little bit overrepresented on this panel, but as two Turks. But, you know, I think nothing contributed more to the coming together in terms of feelings and sentiments and to the improvement of the relations between two neighbors, Greece and Turkey, than when then Foreign Minister George Papandreou sent a Greek rescue team after the terrible earthquake in '99 in Turkey. And when the Turkish people saw that this Greek rescue team was there saving children that were under the rubble in the earthquake, and then there was a much smaller Greek earthquake, and the Turks reciprocated and sent their team. I'm giving this as an example that, you know, politics cannot be just the calculus, the cold calculus of national interest or the benefit-cost analysis of economics. There has to be something more in it. There has to be values, which Saintliness talked about. And I think Europe, beyond the budget deficit, the fiscal rules, you know, the 3% of GDP deficits and all of this, in some ways has to renew the kind of élan, the kind of, you know, feelings of building a new world that were at the origin of Europe. And here, I hope it will happen. I think this battle is probably as important as the battle about deficits and things of that sort. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me